My name is Gary Campbell, and in this video I will discuss the various forms of conflict church leaders may be required to address, suggest positive methods for addressing the conflict, and address the question, can conflict ever be positive? As soon as a person begins to read the book of Genesis, they are confronted with conflict. There was a conflict between Cain and Abel, resulting in the first murder on the planet. There was conflict between Adam and God, when Adam sinned in the garden and was separated from God. In the May 1999 edition of the Christianity Today magazine, there was a cartoon I thought was cute that depicted a mother telling her young son the reason he did not have a father. She said, in the cartoon, "You never knew your father because he was killed at a conflict resolution seminar." Not all conflicts have to end tragically. There is a purpose for conflict. An older gentleman I worked for said, conflict comes from people doing. If the people are not doing, then there is no conflict. As I read chapter 16 of our textbook, I remembered the words he told me over 40 years ago. I believe interpersonal conflict is the most common conflict a leader of the church will have to address and to resolve. If you put a person by themselves, there are no conflicts. If you put two or more people together, you will eventually have to address a conflict between them. Eventually, there will be conflicts between church members, staff and leadership, and others. Over 90% of all conflicts are in this category. These can be disagreements on who is going to sing in the choir, or lead a study when there is one spot and more than one person desiring that spot. The interpersonal conflict may then escalate into a negative confrontation that will require intervention on behalf of church leadership. You will find a whole host of various forms of this category, such as gossip, slander, legalism, power controls, false teaching, and the list can go on and on. If the church has a good system to deal with it, then little conflict would escalate to the point of confrontation. We Christians can be like little kids seeking what we can get away with until the parents come back. This is just our human nature. However, remember what I said a moment ago. There is conflict because people are doing. If you have conflict in your church, then your membership is doing something. If you have no conflict, then I suggest they are doing nothing. Another type of conflict is intrapersonal conflict, which is a conflict where our self-desires are opposed to what God desires for us. This is the personality and desires of an individual seeking to change and to grow that is in conflict with the sinful nature or other beliefs and ways. The new life in Christ versus the old way of sin. And this is not limited to new Christians. In fact, this type of conflict is caused by older, church-grown people more than anyone else. This struggle becomes like a group of politicians, all campaigning for dominance in the office they seek. We're seeing that on television now. This is where our spiritual crisis comes into play. And when the wrong dominances take over the will of the Christians, then the self is in conflict with the church, and the self is fighting God's character, which produces the moodiness and power plays we often see. Virtually all passive conflict is a result from these struggles in some form, and where a lot of our church fights and even family struggles derive from. This is where the famous adage, for evil to happen, all that needs to be done is for good men to do nothing, affects the church and family. Again, going back to what the man said to me over 40 years ago, doing nothing. Substantive conflict is conflicts of moral grounds. This is the area that theological disputes come from. The conflict over vision or goals, color of the hymnals, or it could be values such as abortion, which we are talking about today, socially. This issue is not personality or people, but a cause. This can quickly escalate into interpersonal and intrapersonal conflict, and the reason why a lot of churches today split. The study of eschatology, I think, is a good example of how a theological dispute can cause splits in the church and intrapersonal conflicts. When I was in the military, I spent a lot of time resolving conflicts within my assigned units. It was an everyday task. Church leaders have the same job that I did in the military in the sense they will always be confronted with conflict within the membership of the church. It will come from one of the three categories I covered at the beginning of this video. Can conflict ever be positive? I believe it can be. Many years ago, there was conflict within the church at the time. From that conflict, the Reformation movement was born. The Reformation movement resulted with the various religious denominations that we enjoy today. Our textbook says congregations that suppress conflict find it acts like a pressure cooker. The heat builds and finally explodes. An open, active church allows for a continuous release of pressure, and conflicts less likely to be destructive. Do not fear conflict. However, embrace conflict. If handled correctly, it can be a positive for the church, not a negative in the end.